JD. Most of you know me already. Those of you who don't, well, you're going to get to know me a little bit better right here. Coming to you from my daughter's room, the next generation. She's at grandma's house, so she won't mind if we use it a little bit. It's a small space. Very big, as you can see. It's about a cozy space. I'm here to talk to you tonight because y'all have me kind of sick. I mean, not physically sick, not mentally sick, not like way out there like some of you people, but you just have me. You just have me beside myself. Because on the right side of me, there's all these wackos out there. It says, I need my AR-15, I need my AK-47 because my government's going to come and subject me. Yeah, that's working out real well in the American history. And then you have the people on the right telling those people they don't have the right to those guns. And you all are sick. I mean, you're sick in the head too. You know, it isn't about what gun is right for you and what gun's wrong for you. No, it's not. I'm going to give you all a lesson in history. As I learned from the former Secretary of the Navy, a man by the name of Theodore Roosevelt. Now, Roosevelt wrote the naval history of the War of 1812. Arguably one of the best works of American history. Arguably. It had such a profound effect on our armed services policy for almost 100 years. We've still got the belief brought to us by Mr. Theodore Roosevelt about what a Navy is supposed to be. But the story doesn't start with America had a powerful Navy and they stood up to the British. The story doesn't start that way. It ends that way. We arguably had better naval tactics than the British. Arguably. But we don't start out as having a real powerful Navy in the War of 1812. It starts out in the little town of Machias, Maine. Now, Machias, for any of you who've been to Maine, it hasn't grown up that much. It's still pretty small. So if you can imagine being there in 1812, it's probably got half the population it does now. The fishing town still is, for the most part. Sits on a small little, quaint little river. Did back then. It's been a seafaring town since well before this country was a country. When it was the chief place for British privateering with their little spat they had with France. So the Americans in the War of 1812 were the aggressors. They got tired of the British kind of like saying, we're going to impose our will on you. Where the British had tried to strangle the Americans. They did. They had tried to take the Mississippi River Valley from the Hudson Bay. They were certainly giving guns to the Indians to keep the Americans in constant warfare, and America got sick of it. They said, we're going to invade. It turned out wonderful. I think the battle was over in like 20 minutes. It was a rout. I mean, the Americans were sent packing, and the British, they said, well, we're going to teach these Americans a lesson about war. I mean, we're sitting over here fighting Napoleon, trying to keep the world free from the French. So they imposed what was called a naval blockade. Now, for any of you who don't understand what a naval blockade is, that's when you get a line of ships and you make sure nothing penetrates the line. So America, for the most part, there's probably a couple naval battles that happened way out in the Atlantic. You know, as ships were trying to get back to America, there's a couple fights, arguably severe losses. We don't know. But by the time that naval blockade is in place, America doesn't really have that much of a navy anymore. Not that we ever did back then. The argument was that the militias would protect the country. And when Theodore Roosevelt writes the naval history of the War of 1812, it's arguable we still don't have a navy. I mean, not to the extent that we have the Navy today. That book set the precedent for what is our naval policy. To this day. Without that book and a couple others that were written by then, one that's written by a man named Aught and another one that was written by a man named Mon, we would not have the Navy that we have today. So Britain's imposed a blockade. And any ship that got close to that blockade, they'd shoot at. So you can imagine a town makes its life on fishing. You can't fish. You ain't got no life. So these people, they have been sending correspondences to Boston saying, we need help. We need help. Our life is being threatened. We need help. Boston wasn't sending anything. They didn't even send them one gun. They had Britain, Maine off. They were gonna let Britain have Maine. If Maine had been invaded, they were gonna let Britain have Maine. They were gonna stop them at Portsmouth. That was the absolute land policy. It had a miserable failures fighting the British on land. So there was what was called a coalition that was being formed in the New Hampshire and Vermont Valley, and they were going to protect Maine. So the Merrill brothers, it's argued they might have had a couple hundred rifles between the whole town. Not that much. And certainly no hunt rifle was going to stand to the British rifled arm. The British, they had rifled arms, and they put those damn things on ships. Well, they had cannons. Who was going to go sailing into a cannon? That was a suicide mission right there. So you can pretty much see, you have a whole town, and you have the ship of war out there. Not a big ship, it's a frigate, man of war ship. Sitting out there. Not a big ship, but ain't anything that was going to stand against it. So Merrill's got themselves in a bar one night, and you can argue they hit the breaking point. They were hating life. They weren't making a living. They weren't eating very well. The booze was running out, if there was any booze left at that point, because the Merrills were let's face it, Machias has always been a seafaring town. It's always been a town of drunks. So, argue the booze was running out, and as they hit this point, they hit this breaking point of saying, we're just not going to live like this anymore. We'd rather die. In fact, it's Joseph Merrill who's said to have jumped up on the table, and he stripped off his clothes down to his bare chest, and he said, if I die tonight, I at least die for a man. And his brother, of course, is going to be cheering him on, because his brother's sitting down there, and it's like, yeah, well, it's Joe, he's drunk. And the rest of the men are inspired by this. I mean, they are absolutely inspired by this. And they say the same thing, we've had enough. That ship of war sitting out there, it's the end of the blockade. They don't have a whole lot of help. They're the end of the blockade. They're relying on their cannons. They're relying on their guns to protect them. And what we got, we have freedom protecting us. We don't have guns. As I said, I might have had a couple hunting rifles between the lot of them. They didn't have guns. So they didn't even have ships. They didn't even have fishing boats. What they had was dinghies. Now, for any of you who don't know nautical terminology at all, dinghy is just a small rowboat. They had a few of those. And so what ends up happening is the Merrills organize all of the men in these little dinghies. These little tiny dinghies. And they start rowing out to this ship of war. And they hung one little dinghy out there, and the British are laughing at it. They even took a couple pot shots with their rifles, just to kind of scare the men in the dinghy. And as they're doing this, the Merrills swing up in behind the ship. And they climb the anchor rope, they board the ship, and they start beating the ever-loving crap out of the British. Not with guns, but with clubs and shovels and whatever else they could find. Oars. And when they were done with the men on the deck, they went down below deck and they beat up the shipmates. They took the ship without firing a single shot. Now, that might not be true. Might have been a couple people that died, but their cabin boy maybe might have died. But for the most part, they take the ship without one gun. And they sail the ship back to Machias. They have a big old huge party. And then regular soldiers come, and they take the ship and they sail it back to Boston. And it becomes part of the U.S. Navy. Arguably, the first battle of the War of 1812 is fought by a bunch of drunk fishermen who don't have guns. They don't have the technology to win. All they had was freedom. This should teach us some. This should teach us a lot, actually. In the Revolution, we didn't win a whole lot of wars. In the history of the Revolution is one loss after another. It was a war of attrition. We were going to win or we were going to die trying. The South tried the same strategy in the Civil War, the War of Secession. Now they were fighting for their rights. Fair enough. You got to give it to them. They took up arms and they stood up for their rights and they lost. So arguably, South won most of their battles. They lost the war. There's a belief among you people out there, that you can defend yourselves with whatever technology. And I'm sure for you, you're pretty crack shots. You probably outshoot me. But at the end of the day, you take a well-regulated army, you put yourself against them, you're probably going to lose. You probably ain't going to be remembered. Certainly, any loss of life on that British man of war ship, that frigate ship, nobody remembers them. They do remember the Merrills. Boys that had the hood spot. Let the booze get the better of them. Those are the people that are remembered. Not because they had technology, but they had something that you guys don't have. You on the gun control people, you don't have that. You don't have freedom. What you have is fear. You're afraid, your fellow man. And you people on the other side, you don't have freedom, you have fear. You live in constant fear of some government taking over and squashing you. Free people, they're free up here, and they're free in here. You don't need a gun to be free. You don't need arms to be free. What you need is the ability to trust your fellow man to stand up and do what's right. That's it. That's, ladies and gentlemen, how we won this nation. And anybody who tells you otherwise, they're just rewriting history. They are. We didn't win with technology. We didn't win with better arms or better numbers. We won with our hearts and with our minds, being together as one in this country. So all you all that's making this big fuss, that's all it is. You ain't got the spirit behind it. You all need to take a second and think. What are you really afraid of? What are you really afraid of? I ain't afraid of some guy with a gun. I die. Well, I ain't afraid of my government. It's been there. Governments rise, governments fall. It's been there. It certainly hasn't been ruled by tyranny. Certainly, arguably, it's been ruled by tyranny before. It's been ruled by freemen before. Ain't nothing new, folks. This whole argument ain't new. It goes way back to the 1800s. When we were afraid of Indians and we passed a law that said you aren't allowed to sell gun to an Indian. We have gun laws. We ain't funding the gun laws. Nobody's funding the gun laws. It's probably why we have so much gun violence, because we've decided we're not going to be a lawful people anymore. We're going to be a people that's ruled out of fear. Terrorists come, they bomb all buildings, we can become afraid. When I was a kid, we had terrorists take Americans, take them into a back room, shoot them. How's that any different than ran in a plane through a building? Honestly, y'all are afraid. Y'all are living out of fear. And as another Roosevelt once said, the only thing that you do have to fear is fear itself. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is God's honest truth. So stop living in fear and start living in freedom.